Okay, so let's get at this ENG4U. Okay. So Nicole, you might remember this as a different, being numbered differently, but it's the same one. And it's the larger, more complicated assignment because you're grade 12 students. And it's a really good piece of writing skill to develop before you go off to university. So it's a compare and contrast essay. You're going to compare and contrast Blanche and Stella. How are they similar? How are they different? What we learned about Blanche by contrasting her to Stella. So the key thing here is that I'm more concerned. This assignment is about us understanding who Blanche is. Stella and any other character I discuss are tools in which I'm using to understand Blanche, right? I don't care about Stella's motivations because, quite frankly, we don't ever really get into it. All we know is that she's obsessed with Stanley and she might have been like Blanche before. But the protagonist is Blanche, and our focus needs to be on Blanche for this compare and contrast essay. Here are the learning goals, but I'm not going to go over them. We've kind of talked about it, but basically it's the ability to read and understand plays and come up with strategies how to decode them. And then the writing is how to gather information, how to create outlines to create a compare and contrast essay. It's how to create outlines and rough drafts, and then how to edit and proofread your work to prepare your work for final evaluation. When looking at this, I am looking for the following. I know I can identify at least two differences and two similarities between Blanche and Stella. So that's part of the conversation. That's part of me going over your outlines and sort of ask you some questions, but you got to tell me two things that make them the same and two things that make them different, right? I need to use four relevant quotes minimum, which means you can have more, but I want at least 4 in my compare and contrast essay. Only one quote can be a sentence long, which means you have to choose quotes that have enough information that the quote itself pretty much shows me and explains why they are the same or why they are different, right? If your quote is just 1 sentence long, you need to spend another 200 words explaining why that quote fits into your point of why they're the same, then the quote isn't long enough or it's not more detailed, the quote's not detailed enough. You need to make sure that it's long enough and it's relevant. The quote also proves what you're going to say. I know I must create a clear statement in my first paragraph that provides an entry to the statement, what we learned about Blanche by contrasting her to Stella. So that is the question you need to answer her. What we learn about Blanche by contrasting her to Stella, right? Notice that the focus of the thing is, the subject is Blanche. Stella is the thing that is used to learn more about Blanche, because Blanche is the story. Blanche is the focus of this essay. I'm going to say her name again, Blanche, 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 Blanche. If in your essay, you say, Blanche is like this and Stella's like this and Blanche Stella's like this, I will say, I don't care about Stella. I only care about Stella as a character or a foil that I can use so I have a better understanding of Blanche. Use of creative and critical thinking process. I know that I must contrast Stella and Blanche in order to discuss if Blanche is able to adapt to her environment, which means it occurs in paragraph 4. Part of this essay and part of the analysis of Blanche is her lack of ability to adapt, right? She does not have the ability to adapt to the situation, which means she can't change from the old South to the new South. And you have to explore that in the 4th paragraph when I go over this, because this is going to be one of the things you're going to understand about them when you contrast the two women. Next, I can create a compare and contrast essay using proper spelling, grammar, sense, and paragraph structure. And then you want sure your essay uses clear, easy to understand language, and again, the writing process. Okay, so that is the first part of this. Let's look at the success criteria. So the goal is, what I'm looking for is to gain a greater understanding of Blanche, right? Again, don't care about other characters. She's the protagonist. She's the reason that we are even following the story. If she doesn't exist, Nothing happens in the story. It's just Stanley and Stella living their life in New Orleans. Find similarities between Blanche and Stella, which is compare. So I want to stress this. When I say compare and contrast, people think it means the same and how they're different. That's the only one part of it. When you compare something, you look at how things are the same, you look at how things are different. That's a comparison. I am buying an iPhone. I have a choice of phones. I can either get a Samsung S21 or I can get an iPhone 11, right? So I'm looking at how are they the same as phones and features and stuff, and how they differ. That's called a comparison. What we learn, what do the differences teach us about Blanche, the play, author's message, contrast? Contrast is when I look at how things are different, what does that tell me about the subject that I want to focus on? So if I were to compare, and I've used this term, it's old technology, we don't even really, they're not that much around anymore. No, actually, no, let me go back to that. When I compare Android phones and iOS phones, right? And let's say in my comparison, a difference is one is open source and one is not. So Android phones are open source, which means anyone can manipulate, put in programs, change it, alter it, change its look, change its features, how it runs. Apple is not, right? You buy into an ecosystem, right, that operates the same on all phones. That's how it is. You can't do anything about it unless Apple decides they're going to do something about it, and they're going to push out an update to you. But that's how it's going to be. When I contrast those two, right, what makes them different? What are they like? What are the differences prove to me? For me, the contrast is, well, one company is really concerned about security, and one is more concerned about individual expression, right? So Apple, by not opening its, by maintaining tight control, is, look, we're concerned about your phone running smoothly, and if we have control, we can optimize your phone, right? That's why our phones last 5 years versus these other guys who only last 3 or 4, right? That's why we can run operating systems on older phones, because we control everything and we know it runs, and that's how it is. We're all about security. Android phones, in the contrast, are different. They're saying, no, we understand people have different parental needs and how they absorb their media and their phones. We want to create an environment where those individuals can kind of do what they want, right, on their phone to make it the best experience for them. That's the contrast. So compare is how they're the same, how they're different, and contrast is how the difference, what do the differences teach us about the subject or subjects in that are being examined. Okay, and also this is how to learn to write a 5-paragraph academic essay. Okay, first step is read the novel, read the play. So read up to scene 9. You can finish the play as well. I would say finish the play. All the information from the play would be relevant. You can write the play from anything that happens from scene 1 to 11. Right now, in previous classes, I've sort of done this with other students, and they've helped me to design these points of information that you could use for your essay. First off, is called Conduct Research. It's identify 2 similarities and identify the similarities and differences between the women to each. So when we looked at this as a group, as a class, we said there were 2 similarities. The first one is both were raised in the Old South, which is the Gentile tradition. The women must be courted by men, classed by system, defined gender roles. That's what the Old South is. That, you know, it's those were born and raised in the situation. So, for example, if you made a comment, if you wanted to prove that, and you talked about, you know, either Stella getting mad at Stanley's behavior and accosting him for it, right, which is a callback to her values, or the fact that those Blanche and Stella make fun of the other women, right, because they come off as, well, we're better than them, we're superior to them. That's an example. So that's what. So when you look at that both South, it means how do you show that both those women have a similar mindset and value, right? For the second similarity, you must think about what makes them similar, right? And there are tons of stuff that makes them similar. One of them, I'm not going to say, but it has to do with men. I want you to think about it. And when you do your outline, I'm going to see if you get how they handle the issue of men in their books, or how both women deal with men. Difference, right? So the two differences that the group saw was, this one was Blanche is more concerned about her appearance, right? Which means, we see that Blanche is constantly worried about what she looks like. We don't really ever see Stella worrying about anything when it comes to physical presence at all. Second difference is Blanche is stuck in a digital edition. Stella has abandoned it, right? Which means Blanche is kind of not willing to change who she is, while Stella has completely abandoned that and become a new person. Okay, so contrast is when we look at the differences, right? About appearance and about being stuck in digital tradition. The contrast we come with is Blanche cannot adapt to a new world. Learn from this one point two in differences. For each point, find a quote that supports it, and quote should be multiple sentences. So we've understand that Blanche can adapt, right, to the new world around her. Right? And then you would gather information to prove that point, which you're kind of done. Step 3 is the outline structure, right? So first paragraph, introduction, you talk about in general terms. An example of general terms are the topic in this general form would be this. To understand one thing, we compare and contrast to another thing, right? So that's an example of writing something super general that's about your topic, but doesn't actually even involve the focus of your topic, because you're bringing people into your conversation. So you just start as broadly and as easy for them to interpret as possible. So you briefly describe what points you're going to discuss in your essay. You're going to describe the two things that make them the same, two things that make them different, right? And you also, you may want to mention the contrast. What are the differences teach us about each other, right? So you see a statement. You see a statement has to answer this question. What do we learn about Blanche by contrasting with Stella? By examining blah, 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 we understand that Blanche is blah, 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 right? Or we learn, by looking at these things, we learn that Blanche is blah, blah, blah. So it's about what do we learn about Blanche when contrasting her to Stella, right? Not anything about Stella. Stella's name should be used briefly, if not at all. In this, you're focusing on Blanche. Okay, so second paragraph is going to be your similarities. You're going to have compare two similarities of the women. You state, quote, explain for each one, which means you make a statement about, sorry, it's not popping up. So if that one was paragraph 2, let's say you made a statement that both raised in church tradition, you explain what that is, you find a quote to support, shows that they both have those values, you explain why that quote supports that point. You also then say, find another thing in that paragraph, another reason it supports the idea that they are similar. You have traditional sentence or sentence that basically says, well, many things are the same, they both have differences as well. And then you compare differences. Same idea, you have two differences, right? State, quote, explain for each difference, and you have a transition sentence. Fourth paragraph is contrast. What do the difference teach us about Blanche? Adaptation. State, quote, explain. Now, remember, adaptation is something you need to sort of discuss in the scene, because one of the big aspects of adaptation is what happens if you don't adapt to your environment? Patrick, what happens if you don't change or adapt to the environment you live in?
Well, people are gonna really block you away. If you're not ever gonna fit in there.
Okay, so blocking away, think of it this way, right? You go outside in the winter in shorts and a t-shirt, right?
Yeah.
Is that a good idea to do in the winter?
Not really.
Right, right. So you adapt by putting on a winter jacket boots, hat, gloves, scarf, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you're going to keep on doing that as long as you live in Canada, because you know at certain times it gets very cold and you're going to have to adapt to that, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So does Blanche adapt to her environment like you adapted, like you will adapt to the winter? Does Blanche change her attitude and behavior? No. So what's going to happen to Blanche?
She gonna get hurt.
Right. Yeah. And what happened to didn't she? And right. So think about it this way. It's the same idea in biology when we talk about Darwinism, right? I know people think about Darwinism and they think about it completely wrong. Darwinism isn't the strongest survive. It's the most adaptable species that survives, right? So
Yeah.
we have long-necked giraffes because the food source was up high, right? And the giraffes that had short necks could not eat enough food, could not reproduce enough offspring. Therefore, the offspring that survived were these tall-necked giraffes, right?
Yeah.
Therefore, it isn't because the tall-necked giraffes are inherently superior to the short-necked giraffes. It just meant that in the environment they lived in, they adapted better and survived. So
Mm-hmm.
you need to talk about that contrast. Like, well, what are the differences about Blanche? Blanche can't adapt. Blanche can't adapt to her environment. And then maybe have a quote showing that how she refuses to adapt, right? She refuses to change. Right. She doesn't get with the program and understand that she can't be the same person she was back in the old South. Okay. And what does that mean? When things don't adapt, what happens to them?
They don't fit and they will get hurt.
Yeah, they suffer. They even die. Now, does Blanche die physically? No. But symbolically, she dies, right? Everything falls apart for Blanche. Things don't work out well for her, right? She ends up going to an insane asylum.
Yeah.
Right? Then your conclusion is restate thesis and then discuss what the play is saying about the need to adapt. So you restate what you're proven, but you also have to tie in the larger idea of what is the play talking, what is the play messaging about the concept of adaptation, right? What is the play kind of telling you the importance of learning to adapt to your environment surroundings? Okay, so that's the structure I'm looking for your compare and contrast. Okay. Are there questions about this assignment? This one can be a bit tricky.
I feel like not yet until I actually started.
Right. But okay, so good. But remember, compare is similarities, difference, contrast is what do the differences teach us about the person? Again, focus on Blanche, not Stella, because Blanche is the story. Stella is the tool to help us understand Blanche. Okay. All right. So you can get started on that right now. I am going to head to the other room and go over there some with them. Okay. And then if you have any questions, you can ask me. The goal is to have your outline done for Monday the latest.
Okay.
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 Nicole, any questions from you?
No questions.
Okay. All right. So I'll let you guys work in here. Don't go to back to the big room. Just work in for now, and then I'll close the rooms and bring it all back to the big room.
Okay.
Okay. Let me